Hello everyone. In this session, we shall have an analysis with respect to the recently released report by IPCC, the 6th assessment report, the report named Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis. Now, before getting into the findings or analysis of this particular report, let us first have an understanding with respect to IPCC, what IPCC has been doing, what are the important reports which has been published by IPCC, etc. Now, if I talk about global warming, there has been various steps or measures which has been taken at a global level as well as at national level, Indian level, to combat global warming. Now, if I talk about the global level, if I talk about the global response to global warming, we can majorly talk about UNFCCC and IPCC. UNFCCC is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, one of the legacy holder of Rio Earth Summit. Rio Earth Summit 1991 actually gives us the legacy of three. One is CBD, Convention of Biodiversity. Second is UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the third one is UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Now, Earth Summit 1992, one of the major legacy holder of Earth Summit 1992 is UNFCCC. Now, what is this UNFCCC and IPCC? What is the fundamental difference between these two? Now, UNFCCC take actions with respect to climate change, right? UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has got different COPs, Conference of Parties, where the world leader come and sit together and discuss with respect to the causes, consequences, how we can actually mitigate climate change, etc. So take actions, UNFCCC. What IPCC is doing? IPCC actually collect data, right? Publishes reports. So this particular part I'm not concerned right now. We shall be only discussing on this particular part in this particular session. Now, if I talk about IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it is a scientific intergovernmental body. It was established in 1988. It was established in 1988 by two United Nations organizations. One is World Meteorological Organization, WMO, and two is UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. So IPCC was actually formed by UNEP and WMO in 1988. So what IPCC does? IPCC produces reports that supports UNFCCC. I told you IPCC actually collect data, publishes reports. The world leaders, after actually reading this particular report, then go to UNFCCC, have a meeting, take what necessary action for combating the climate change. So IPCC actually publishes reports, and reports IPCC publishes are of two types majorly. One is assessment report and the second is special reports. Upon the request of various organizations or various countries, IPCC publishes certain special reports. Okay, apart from that, IPCC develops or IPCC produces what we actually call it as assessment report. Now please note that one most important thing is IPCC does not carry out its own original research. IPCC does not carry out its own original research. Thousands of scientists and other experts actually contribute to IPCC on a voluntary basis, right? So it is basically what it is not having its own research wing. So it is basically the various scientists, they will actually and other expert, they will actually what contribute to IPCC on a voluntary basis, right? And if I talk about this assessment reports is being published by IPCC once in 5 to 6 years, and this assessment report is majorly focusing on what is happening with respect to climate change across the globe, right? Now if I talk about IPCC assessment report, I told you IPCC has been formed in 1988. Now if I ask you to take on the first assessment report of IPCC, just 2 years after the establishment of IPCC actually comes up with what we call it as first assessment report, talking about what is the nature of climate change, what are the important causes with respect to climate change, what exactly are the likely consequences of climate change, right? So just 2 years of its establishment, we had the first assessment report, which is coming in 1990. So 1990 IPCC actually comes up with the first assessment report. Now this assessment report, the first assessment report of 1990, neither had the demarcation of working groups or nor incorporated the desired infrastructure for the global participation, but it actually comes up with certain conclusions. That conclusions has been confirmed or valid even today with respect to climate change. So it is basically what it is. Report actually consists of causes, consequences, as well as the mitigation efforts to combat to climate change. Now after this first assessment report, which has been published in 1990, in 1995 IPCC comes up with the second assessment report. So second assessment report has been published in 1995. Now if I talk about this second assessment report actually emphasized the importance or significance of demarcating the functioning of IPCC, right? So that means they have actually realized that we must divide our work, and that actually marks up the formation of working group 1, working group 2 and working group 3. Okay, but the implementation of this working group 1, 2 and 3 actually came up in the third assessment report. Getting it? So third assessment report, not contemporary, third assessment report, which was actually published in 2001. So third assessment report has got what? Has got a three important three important report. That is report 1, which is actually what? Which is actually assessing, or report 1 or working group 1, which is actually talking about the physical basis of climate change. Right? It is actually what? It is actually the physical science basis of climate change. And working group 2, which actually publishes report, what will be the impact, what will be the vulnerability of climate change. And working group 3, which actually works with respect to the mitigation efforts for climate change. So working group 3, the report 3, it is basically what talking about the mitigation of climate change. So what is the changeover which I see from first assessment, second assessment report to third assessment report? Third assessment report, we can actually see what? We can actually see three reports of working group 1, 2 and 3. The reports of working group 1, 2 and 3, if I talk about working group 1, that report actually deals with the physical science basis of climate change, the important causes of climate change. Second report published by working group 2, it is basically deals with the impact, adaptation as well as vulnerability of climate change. And the third report published by working group 3 deals with the mitigation of climate change. So this dividing the work into three working groups, the decision has been taken in the second assessment report, but the implementation happens from third assessment report. Now from third assessment report onwards, you have 3, 4, 5, 6, the latest being the sixth assessment report, which has been released in the last month, August 2021. Okay, in all these reports you have three reports, one by working group 1, to working group, then second by working group 2, and third by working group 3. Now, and also we have something called the combined, which we call it as a synthesis report. Now coming to the sixth assessment report. The sixth assessment report, the last month, August 2021, the IPCC has actually released the working group 1 report. The report by working group 1, it is basically climate change 2021, the physical science basis. This has been the report which has been published in August 2021, and we are actually expecting the second report, the working group 2, by February 2022, and the third report by working group 3 by March 2022, next year. And also we have the combined report. The synthesis report, which is to be published by next year September. Okay, so this is the timeline, broad timeline with respect to the sixth assessment report. So I hope now you have got an idea with respect to what IPCC has been doing and the different reports with respect to how they are actually publishing the reports and what are the different segments. And also it is basically with respect to the sixth assessment report, the report which has been released, it is only by working group 1. Working group 2 and 3 is expected in February and March in 2022, and the synthesis report which is expected by September 2022. Right? Now, keeping this in mind, we need to analyze the sixth assessment report, the report by working group 1, which has been published last month. Now coming to the key findings or key points of sixth assessment report, the working group 1 report, the climate change 2021, the physical science basis. The first and foremost thing this report actually says is the average surface temperature of the earth. The average surface temperature of the earth will cross 1.5 degrees Celsius, over pre-industrial level in the next 20 years. That means by 2040. Okay, and 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century without sharp reduction of emissions. So this report, one of the most important finding in this particular report is the average surface temperature of earth will cross over 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level in the next 20 years. That means by 2040, average surface temperature will actually cross 1.5 degrees Celsius, and also by 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. Now, what is the significance of this 1.5 2 degrees Celsius? Why we are actually talking about, why this report is actually talking about 1.5 2 degrees Celsius? Now, if I talk about, I hope you are aware of Paris Climate Agreement. The Paris Climate Change Conference, it is COP 21, which happened, we actually call it as Paris Summit 2015. So Paris Summit actually talked about certain important decisions, or one of the important expected key result of the agreement is that this conference has actually asked the countries of the world to limit the global temperature rise, maximum up to 2 degrees Celsius, okay, till 2050, right? So it is basically what, if possible, we have to limit the temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the Paris Agreement talks about what? The Paris Agreement, which has actually entered into force in November 2016 after the ratification by at least 55% of the countries. And what happened is India signed and ratified a Paris Agreement in 2016. So this agreement, this conference has actually asked the countries of the world to limit the global temperature rise maximum up to 2 degrees Celsius till 2015, and or the what, or if possible by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we need to actually put efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. What does that mean actually? If I talk about average temperature of Earth, the average temperature of Earth is 15 degrees Celsius. I'm talking about average temperature. So what happens is, so we need to actually limit the average temperature of Earth by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So maximum 15 can be 16.5 degrees Celsius or 17 degrees Celsius, not beyond that. This was actually the target made in Paris Agreement, right? Now, if I talk about this average temperature, so average temperature, I told you, it is basically what? It is 15 degrees Celsius. So the question is, who keeps the Earth warm? Or who is responsible for keeping Earth at 15 degrees Celsius? We can say that greenhouse gases. How is it possible? That is why we are actually what? You might have studied about greenhouse effect. So that means if greenhouse gases were absent, then Earth's average temperature will decrease. If greenhouse gases increases, there will be an increase with respect to temperature of Earth. So who is actually keeping the Earth warm? It is greenhouse gases. Now you might have actually read with respect to the temperate countries. In temperate countries, you know that no enough sunlight availability is there. The insolation, incoming solar radiation is less with respect to the higher latitude countries, especially temperate countries. So what they actually do is, what happens is, this is a glass panel, right? So this is a glass panel. So what happens is, you have the short wave radiations. What happens is, in temperate countries, for getting enough heat for plants, they'll actually put a glass panel. So what is happening here is, this glass panel will actually allow the short wave radiations to pass through it, and they won't allow the long wave radiation to pass through it. So what happens is, short wave radiations coming here, re-radiating as a long wave. So long wave radiations will get stuck inside this glass panel. I'm not getting into details of greenhouse effect. So this long wave radiation produces heat, and that is how that actually helps the plant to grow, right? Now if you can actually recall the electromagnetic spectrum, you have ultraviolet rays, visible light, infrared, visible light, infrared, right? So what happens is, here frequency is high this side, wavelength is high here, right? So short wave radiations has got what? So frequency is high means energy is high, wavelength is less. So short wave radiations has got energy high, they will actually pass through the glass panel. Then what happens is, touches the surface, then they will come back as what? They will come back as long wave radiation. So long wave radiation, what happens? Energy is less, so they cannot actually penetrate through, and this effect, what we call it as greenhouse effect, right? So what happens is, this greenhouse effect is also happening in nature because of atmosphere. So what is actually happening is, suppose this is Earth's surface, right? Now what is happening is, you have like greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, etc. These are actually greenhouse gases. So what you have, sun short wave radiations coming here, re-radiating as what? Long wave radiation, going back as long wave radiation, right? So what happens? This greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, then greenhouse what? Ozone. They won't actually allow. They won't actually allow long wave radiations to pass through it. What they will do is they will actually trap the heat. Getting it? So this long wave radiations are actually responsible for the heat. Getting it? So what happens is, so with the greenhouse gases, the temperature is what? Temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. With greenhouse gases, the average temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. If there is no greenhouse gases, what happens? Temperature will actually become minus 18 degrees Celsius. Then Earth would have been a lifeless planet. Now what happens here? If carbon dioxide increases, methane increases, what happens? The trapped heat increases. Getting it? Trapped heat increases. So what happens is this 15 degrees Celsius becomes 16, 17, 18, etc. So this continuous increase, this is what we call it as global warming. This is actually what we call it as global warming. Getting it? So what happens is, if I talk about these gases, the concentration of these gases increases, carbon dioxide, methane, etc. increases. The trapped heat energy is actually getting increased. So trapped heat energy getting increased means, with the greenhouse gas, the temperature, average surface temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. When this greenhouse gas increases, trapped heat energy increases. So what happens to the temperature? Temperature from 15, it can be 16 or 17 or 18. So this continuous increase is what we actually call it as what? What we actually call it as global warming. So if I talk about, if you come back to the sixth, the report of working group 1, the sixth assessment report of working group 1, it is basically what? It is actually saying that what is the most important finding of this particular report? This report says that by 2040, because we already making some efforts through Paris Agreement to limit the temperature rise by maximum by 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are putting all the efforts, but this particular report, sixth assessment report, actually comes up with the finding that the average surface temperature of Earth will cross 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level in the next 20 years. Getting it? That is by 2040, and also 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. Getting it? So that means for the first time, IPCC has actually said that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, it is what? It is inevitable even in the best case scenario. 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature or warming, 1.5 degrees Celsius warming is inevitable even in the best case scenario. Getting it? So what this report says is, till now we have an increase of 1.09 degrees Celsius. Till now we have an increase of 1.09 degrees Celsius, but it will go up to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2040. And out of this 1.09 degrees Celsius, this report says that 1.07 degrees Celsius increase, it is due to what? It is due to human activities. It is due to human activities. Getting it? So the first time IPCC has actually said that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming is inevitable even in the best case scenario. Till now we have already done with what? Increase of 1.09 degrees Celsius, and out of this 1.09 degrees Celsius, 1.07 degrees Celsius temperature increase, it is due to what? It is due to greenhouse gas emissions by human activities. Getting it? Now this report says that the last decade was hotter than any period of time in the past 1,25,000 years. Last decade was the most hottest one. Getting it? So that means what? That means temperature is actually increasing. Another important finding in this particular report is, this says that carbon dioxide concentration, or carbon dioxide is the major culprit with respect to global warming. So carbon dioxide has been and also will be or will continue to be the dominant cause of global warming under all greenhouse gas emission scenario. Getting it? So it is basically what? Carbon dioxide still continues to be the most culprit with respect to what? With respect to global warming. Now, this report actually says that apart from carbon dioxide, this report also highlights the importance of methane. Methane, which has been released from landfills, which has been released from agricultural activities, oil wells, or coal minings. Right. So methane concentration over the last 2 centuries, the methane concentration in the atmosphere has been doubled, and methane is more than 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. Methane can actually trap heat. It is what? It is 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide. Right. So methane plays an important role. This report especially about emphasis the role of methane. Right. Another important report, another important finding which has been given in this particular report is, if greenhouse gases, or this actually talks about what we actually call it as carbon budget. Carbon budget. Now, what is this carbon budget? This concept was introduced in 5th assessment report. So for the first time, the 5th assessment report actually quantified what we actually call it as carbon budget. Carbon budget means the amount of carbon dioxide emission which we can emit. Carefully understand what I am saying. The amount of carbon dioxide emissions which we can emit while still having a likely chance of limiting global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. We want to limit the temperature rise up to 17 degrees Celsius. So how much carbon dioxide we can emit? That is what we actually call it as carbon budget. Right? So what the report actually says that, in 5th assessment report actually says that, even by staying within the carbon budget and keeping the global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius, some regions will still experience what? The increased risk, basically talking about increase in mean sea level, forest fire, water shortages, etc. And these risk significantly increases with every degree of warming above 2 degrees Celsius. This risk continues to increase. Getting it? Now, in the 5th assessment report, what they actually said is, to remain below 2 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial level. To remain below 2 degrees Celsius of the pre-industrial level, the world can emit only about 2,900 gigatons of carbon dioxide from all the sources. Getting it? From all the sources, world can emit 2,900 gigatons of carbon dioxide from industrial revolution till 2100. Right? But till 2011, we have already emitted 1,900 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That means what? That means we already consumed 2/3 of the budget. 2/3 of the budget. So what is remaining? Only 1,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide actually remains. Getting it? So a 5th assessment report actually give us the warning that if the emissions continues like this, the remaining budget will be actually what? Will get over in next 30 what? In next 30 years. I'm talking about 2011. Till 2011, we already utilized 2/3 of the budget. So 5th assessment report, if you read this, 5th assessment report actually talks about, or 5th assessment report actually emphasizes that the key issue therefore is redesigning the emission commitment target or emission reduction commitment. That means how we are actually allocating the remaining carbon budget among the countries in a manner which is fair and equitable, getting, or fair and achievable, because already we have the debates going on between developed countries and developing countries. So I'm not getting into that. That will be dealt in a separate session. So it is basically what the key issue is, how we can actually allocate this particular budget among the countries in a fair and achievable manner. This was actually the important finding in fifth assessment report. The sixth assessment report, the first working group 1 report, also talks about carbon budget. It actually says that world has already depleted near 86% of its available carbon budget till now. Right? Till now, world has already depleted 86% of the available carbon budget. So this was actually another important key point with respect to this particular report. So once you read this particular report, these keywords you need to understand. You need to have a clear-cut clarity with respect to the keywords which is given in the report, because these keywords can be a question in prelims. What is carbon budget? They'll give you 4 definitions of carbon budget. That can be a question. Now, another important finding in this particular report is talking about the weather prediction. What it says is land surface will continue to warm more than the ocean surface. And you know that if I talk about land versus water, land always shows extremes and water maintains. Land will get heated very quickly, cool down very quickly, water will take some time. So what this report says that land surface will continue to be warmer more than the ocean surface. Another important weather predictions is, what it says is the Arctic region will continue to warm, and it is basically what the Arctic sea ice is at lowest, is the lowest in the last in more than 150 years. That means there is a the Arctic ice sheets become very thin. So Arctic sea ice is at the lowest level. Then due to this global warming, there can be the extreme disasters can happen, extreme events, for example daily precipitation. So that can actually cause urban flood like disasters. Then tropical cyclones will become more frequent, more intense. And if I talk about tropical cyclones are very typical to tropical marginal water body. One of the most important prerequisite for the formation of tropical cyclone is sea surface temperature should be 27-28 degrees Celsius. Now what is happening? It is basically the sea surface temperature is getting increased. So sea surface temperature is getting increased means that actually sets a stage for the occurrence of tropical cyclone. So tropical cyclones are becoming more frequent. Tropical cyclones are becoming more intense also. Another important weather predictions, it is talking about the heat waves. There can be intensity, frequency of heat waves will get increased. Getting it? Water cycle will get disturbed. Sea level rise, there will be sea level rise. Sea level rise because of melting of ice. It can be due to melting of ice. It can be due to thermal expansion. Getting it? So these key terms you have to note it down, and you have to use these key terms in your answer. Getting it? So what happens is the overall the sea level rise will increase. Sea level rise will increase due to melting of ice. It can actually due to thermal expansion. That means water molecules expand. There will be an increase in mean sea level. Right. Another important finding in this particular report is, this report actually talks about ocean stratification. What do you mean by stratification? Ocean stratification means water into different layers. There is no mixing up of water. That means you have the top layer, the lowest density, water will actually form like this. This is the low density layer. This is the high density layer. High density layer means water will sink. So what happens is when water is actually arranged in the form of different layers, what will happen? There will be lack of mixing of water. Lack of mixing of water means that is definitely going to affect the marine organisms. That means they won't be getting any nutrients. Right, we actually, this upwelling actually gives us what? Upwelling means water is actually coming up. This upwelling process will actually give what? That will actually transfer the nutrients towards the surface. So here what happens is ocean stratification happen. Ocean stratification means water is actually divided into different layers. So you have like low density, high density. So high density water is sinking. So there is no mixing up of water, and this mixing up of water, there is no nutrient transfer is there. Definitely that is going to affect the marine organisms. And also what happens is the heat. What happens is the heat will be, more heat will be getting trapped in the topmost layer. If more the heating of the topmost layer, the more heat is getting trapped in the topmost layer. So what will happen? Sea surface temperature will increase. If there is increase in sea surface temperature, tropical cyclone intensity, frequency of tropical cyclone increases. Getting it? So that can be another effect. This report also talks about increased deoxygenation. Deoxygenation means what? What happens is if the temperature of the water or ocean increases, the amount of dissolved oxygen decreases. Amount of dissolved oxygen decreases means what? That is going to affect the marine species. That is going to affect the marine species. Getting it? So that is another impact. Acidification can happen. Ocean acidification. What is ocean acidification? The carbon dioxide is actually absorbed by the oceans. Carbon dioxide absorbed by the oceans. This carbon dioxide absorbed by the oceans reacts with water, forming what is called as carbonic acid. That actually increases the acidic characteristics of water. So increase in carbon dioxide results in increase in absorption. So carbon dioxide, water plus carbonate ion have a reaction that actually leads to the formation of bicarbonate ion. You don't have to get into those reactions. Bicarbonate ions. So what happens is carbonate ion is actually used by the different species to form shells. Now what will happen? Lack of carbonate ions, no shells, no skeletons, no newer shells and skeletons are formed. Getting it? So what happens is the consumption of this carbonate ion that will actually affect the calcification process. So that means ocean become more acidic due to bicarbonate. So increase in carbon dioxide, more absorption of carbon dioxide by what? Oceans. That what happens is carbonic acid is formed, acidic characteristics of water. So these are actually some of the important impacts this report is actually talking about. Which are they? Number one is land surface will continue to be warmer than the ocean surface. Number two is Arctic will continue to be warmer. Arctic sea ice is at its lowest level. Extreme events like daily precipitation can happen. There can be increase in sea level due to what? Melting of ice due to thermal expansion. Tropical cyclones become more frequent, more intense due to increase in sea surface temperature. Increased heat waves. Water cycle is getting disturbed. Getting it? And then ocean stratification happened. Water into different layers. So no mixing, no nutrient affects marine organisms. And also what the topmost layer will be trapping more heat. So sea surface temperature again increases. So it have that cumulative effect. Deoxygenation. What? Dissolved oxygen decreases, affect the marine species. Acidification. Acidification, increasing the acidic characteristics, formation of carbonic acid, increasing the acidic characteristics. Getting it? So these are actually some of the impact which is actually talking about in this particular report. And also with respect to India specific, the findings in this report actually talks about monsoons. Monsoons becomes more unpredictable. Now, if I talk about the sea surface temperature of the marginal water bodies of Indian Ocean, Indian Ocean, you know that Indian Ocean is half ocean. South it is open ocean. North it is what? North it is marginal water bodies of Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. So the sea surface temperature of Indian Ocean has actually what? Has warmed faster than the global average. Getting it? And also heat waves. Heat waves, especially with respect to South Asia, India, heat waves become more intense and frequent during 21st century. Getting it? So these are actually some of the important reports or some of the important findings which has been given in what? Which has been given in the assessment report, in the 6th assessment report published by Working Group 1. Getting it? So other two reports, Working Group 2 and 3, is expected to be released in 2022, in March and February 2022. So this report actually says that climate change is what is described by many scientists, many experts, is what? It's a much greater threat for humanity than COVID-19 because of its irreversible impact. Getting it? So we have got impacts like what? Increase in mean sea level, melting of glaciers, that is going to continue for many years. Getting it? So it is basically what? So there is a need for what? There is a need for a what? An immediate action with respect to cutting the carbon emission, and it is expected that this particular report will be discussed in the next COP, which is going to happen next month in November 2021 in Glasgow. COP, Conference of Parties with respect to UNFCCC. So COP, this report actually sets the stage for the Conference of Parties 26, COP 26, which is going to happen in Glasgow in November 2021. All right. So this is the broad idea with respect to the IPCC and also the assessment report being what? Specifically on the latest report which has been prepared by scientists of Working Group 1, and the report, the 6th assessment report, titled Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis.